Mary's sorrows, the secret weapon to survive the end of Lent. You feel it in your bones today, and you know exactly what I am talking about. That sudden wall of spiritual exhaustion that hit you somewhere between the middle of this week and this very moment. You started this Lent with fire in your eyes and a list of penances that felt like they were going to change your life forever. But now, the fire has turned to cold ash. The fast that seemed manageable is now a source of constant irritation, and the prayers that felt like a conversation with a friend have become a chore that you are just trying to check off your list. I want you to listen to me very carefully, because what you are experiencing is not a failure of your will, but a predictable stage of the spiritual journey. We have reached the most dangerous window of the year. We are standing on the edge of Passiontide, and the enemy of your soul is terrified of what happens if you actually finish this race. He is throwing everything he has at you right now to make you stumble before you even see the palms of next Sunday. He wants you to believe that you have already failed, so that you might as well give up the rest of the journey. This is the spirit of discouragement, and it is the primary weapon used against the saints when they are closest to their breakthrough. Think about the words in the letter to the Galatians, chapter 6, verse 9, which tells us not to become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. The enemy knows that your harvest is only 14 days away. He knows that the graces of the resurrection are being prepared for you right now, and his only hope is to make the weight of the cross feel so heavy that you drop it in the mud. But there is a strategic shift happening in the church right now that is meant to save you from this exact collapse. Look around your parish this weekend, and you will see the statues being covered in purple cloth. This is the great veiling. It is a sign that the time for external distractions is over and the time for internal combat has begun. While the world gets louder and more chaotic, the church is asking you to go into a deeper silence. In this silence, there is a person waiting for you who has already walked every single inch of the road to Calvary without ever losing her footing. I am talking about the Mother of Sorrows. Most people look at the sorrows of Mary as a sad story from the past, but they are actually a high-altitude defense system for the exhausted pilgrim. If Saint Joseph was the guardian who secured the perimeter of your home, then Mary is the fortress that secures the interior of your soul. She is the secret weapon that God has provided for those who feel like they cannot take one more step toward the cross. If you are tired, and if you are discouraged, and if you are wondering if any of this sacrifice even matters anymore, then you need to stay with me for the next few minutes. We are going to deconstruct the psychology of this spiritual wall and show you how to use the specific pains of the Blessed Virgin to turn your fatigue into a weapon that the darkness cannot touch. You are not meant to survive the end of Lent on your own strength. You were meant to lean into the one heart that never broke under the weight of the Passion. This is not just about getting through the day. It is about finishing the mission with the same dignity and power that the Mother of God displayed when the world was falling apart around her. You need to understand that tonight at midnight, the spiritual atmosphere of the world undergoes a radical transformation. We are entering the period of Passiontide, which comprises the final 2 weeks of Lent. This is the moment where the Church stops focusing on our personal penance and starts focusing exclusively on the suffering of the King. This shift is not just liturgical, it is ontological. There is a weight in the air that you have likely been feeling without being able to name it. The church veils her beauty because the bridegroom is about to be taken away, and she wants you to feel the void that his absence creates. This threshold is where the casual observer of Lent is separated from the true disciple. Most people treat the last 2 weeks like a countdown to a holiday, but the pilgrim treats them like a descent into the heart of a storm. When the crosses are covered, you are forced to rely on your internal vision of Christ rather than the external images you have grown comfortable with. This is a divine test of your endurance. Think about the book of Jeremiah, chapter 12, verse 5, which asks that if you have raced with men on foot and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? If you are tired now, it is because you have been racing on your own terms. Passiontide is the moment where the horses are released. It is the moment where the intensity of the spiritual battle scales up to its maximum level. The enemy is no longer just whispering temptations about food or comfort. He is attacking the very foundation of your hope. He wants you to feel the same darkness that covered the earth on Good Friday before the day has even arrived. But this threshold is also where the greatest graces are hidden. By entering into this darkness with intentionality, you are preparing your soul to receive a light that the world cannot extinguish. You are moving from the desert of your own efforts into the garden of the Lord's sacrifice. This transition requires a different kind of strength and a different kind of guide. You need to realize that the purple cloth draped over every crucifix and every statue in your church this weekend is not just a piece of fabric, but a deliberate spiritual blackout. This is the sensory fast of Passiontide. For the next 14 days, your eyes are being denied the comfort of the images that usually sustain your prayer life, because the church wants you to experience a holy hunger. We have become so accustomed to the beautiful representations of our faith that we often forget the raw and terrifying reality of the sacrifice they depict. By veiling these symbols, the church is stripping away your emotional crutches and forcing your soul to look at Christ with its internal eyes. This is exactly what the disciples felt when the shadow of the cross began to fall over Jerusalem. Think about the words in the Gospel, according to John chapter 12, verse 36, which tells us that when Jesus had finished speaking, he left and hid himself from them. This hiding is a mystery of divine love because it tests the quality of your faith when the consolation of his presence is removed. Most of us are only good at following the Lord when the sun is shining and the path is clear, but the real work of holiness happens in the dark. This spiritual blackout is designed to reveal the idols of your heart. It shows you whether you are in love with the feeling of being religious or if you are truly in love with the person of Jesus Christ. If you feel a sense of loss or a strange emptiness when you look at the veiled altar, you are finally beginning to understand the sorrow of Mary. She had to watch as the face she had kissed every morning for 30 years was covered in blood and spit and eventually hidden behind the stone of a tomb. By participating in this visual fast, you are entering into her experience of the Passion. You are learning to stay faithful even when you cannot see the end of the road. This deprivation is the only way to sharpen your spiritual senses so that you can recognize the light of the resurrection when it finally breaks through the darkness. But this blackout is only the beginning of the preparation, because as the external world disappears, the internal battle for your focus intensifies. You are being called to a specific kind of endurance that most people never achieve because they never learn the secret of standing in the middle of a collapse. You need to study the word Stabat because it is the most important Latin word you will hear during this entire Passiontide season. It is the word that defines the posture of the Blessed Virgin Mary at the foot of the cross. Most artistic representations of the crucifixion show Mary collapsing into the arms of the other women, but the Gospel, according to John chapter 19, verse 25, explicitly says that near the cross of Jesus stood his mother. This is the architecture of the Stabat. It is the deliberate and conscious decision to remain vertical in a world that is crashing down into horizontal chaos. When you reach this 5th week of Lent and you feel like you're about to buckle under the weight of your own failures, you need to look at the Mother of Sorrows and realize that standing is a spiritual technology that she is offering to teach you today. Standing does not mean that you are not in pain, and it does not mean that your heart is not breaking. It means that you have anchored your soul so deeply in the will of God that the external pressure of the environment cannot force your knees to hit the ground. Think about the physical effort it takes to stand still when a storm is blowing around you. It requires every muscle in your body to be engaged and every ounce of your focus to be centered. This is exactly what is required of you during these final 14 days. The enemy wants you to crawl to the finish line because he knows that if you are on the ground, you are easier to trample. But when you stand with Mary, you are declaring that the cross of Christ is your support and your foundation. You are transforming your fatigue into a pillar of strength for those around you who are also struggling. This is why Mary is called the Tower of Ivory. She was the only one who did not flee, and the only one who did not fall when the Son of God was being executed. By aligning your spine with her example, you are tapping into a reservoir of endurance that is not of this world. You are telling the darkness that you will be there until the very end, regardless of how you feel or how tired you have become. This architecture of the soul is what allows you to survive the most brutal moments of life without losing your identity as a child of the King. Standing is your first act of rebellion against the spirit of discouragement. It is the refusal to let the gravity of sin dictate your altitude. But standing is only the first step, because once you have secured your position, you must learn what to do with the heavy and jagged burden of the pain you are currently carrying. You need to stop wasting your pain because you are currently throwing away the most valuable currency you possess. Most people treat suffering like a tax they are forced to pay or a burden they just have to endure until it passes. Do you realize what you are doing? They complain about the headache, the hunger of the fast, or the fatigue of the journey as if these things were mistakes in the divine plan. But I want to tell you about the alchemist of grief. The Blessed Mother did not just survive her sorrow. She transformed it. She took the raw and jagged iron of her soul's agony, and she smelted it in the furnace of her love for God until it became the pure gold of supernatural merit. This is the secret of the saints that the modern world has completely forgotten. Think about the words in the letter to the Colossians chapter 1, verse 24, where St. Paul says that he rejoices in his sufferings for your sake and in his flesh. He is filling up what is lacking in the afflictions of Christ for the sake of his body, which is the church. You have to understand that this does not mean the sacrifice of Jesus was incomplete on its own. It means that in his infinite mercy, the Savior left a space for us to participate in the redemption of the world. Mary occupied that space more perfectly than any other human being. When she watched the spear pierce the side of her son, she was not just a victim of a tragedy. She was an active participant in a sacrifice. This is how you must learn to handle the burnout you are feeling right now, in the 5th week of Lent. Do not just sit in your discouragement. Do not just wait for Easter so you can go back to your old comforts. Instead, you must hand the raw material of your frustration over to the Mother of Sorrows. She knows how to take a broken Lenten promise or a moment of intense loneliness and turn it into a powerful intercession for the salvation of a soul you may never even meet. This is the only way to weaponize your weakness. When you stop complaining about your cross and start offering it, you are taking the power away from the enemy and placing it back into the hands of the Father. You are becoming a producer of grace instead of just a consumer of it. This change in perspective is what separates a religious person from a mystic who actually changes the spiritual atmosphere of their own home. But even as you learn to transform your pain, you will encounter a specific kind of resistance that tries to bypass the heart and attack your very will. You have to understand that there is a massive shortcut to the heart of Jesus that most people are completely ignoring because they think they have to earn his attention with their own perfection. This is the compassion bypass. The word compassion literally means to suffer with, and nobody has ever suffered with the Savior like his mother did. When you are standing in the middle of this 5th week of Lent and you feel like your prayers are hitting a brass ceiling, you need to realize that you are trying to reach the Son by bypassing the heart that formed him. Think about the words in the book of Lamentations, chapter 2, verse 13, which asks, "To what can I liken you? Or to what can I compare you? O daughter of Jerusalem, for your breach is great as the sea, and who can heal you?" Mary is that sea of sorrow. When you place your small and weak intentions into her broken heart, they are immediately combined with her perfect and infinite love. You are no longer approaching the throne of God as a solitary and struggling individual, but you are approaching as a part of the Mother of Sorrows herself. This is why your prayers carry so much more weight when they are filtered through her intercession. It is like a lawyer who takes a messy and incoherent case and turns it into a brilliant legal brief before presenting it to the judge. Mary takes the jagged edges of your frustration and the coldness of your half-hearted prayers, and she warms them with the fire of her own devotion. She is the bypass that allows your small sacrifices to reach the divine level of merit that you could never achieve on your own. You are not losing your direct connection to Jesus by going through Mary. You are actually strengthening it because you are coming to him in the way that he chose to come to you. He came through her, and the most efficient way back to him is to return the same way. This strategy is what allows you to keep moving forward even when you feel like you have nothing left to give. You are relying on her spiritual momentum instead of your own. But even with this bypass, you still need a map to navigate the specific types of attacks that the enemy is launching against your household right now. You need to stop looking at the 7 Sorrows of Mary as a static list of historical events and start seeing them as a sophisticated tactical map for the survival of your own family. When the elderly Simeon spoke to Mary in the temple, as recorded in the Gospel according to Luke chapter 2, verses 34 to 35, he told her that a sword would pierce her own soul, so that the thoughts of many hearts would be revealed. This was not a poetic metaphor, but a divine warning about the nature of spiritual warfare. These 7 swords are the 7 specific ways the enemy attacks the human heart, and because Mary felt every single one of them, she is the only commander who knows how to defend against them in real time. Think about the first sword, which was the prophecy of Simeon itself. This is the attack of chronic anxiety and the fear of a future you cannot control. If your household is currently paralyzed by worry about what might happen next month or next year, you are under the strike of the first sword, and you need to ask Mary to show you how she carried that weight for 30 years without losing her peace. Think about the second sword, which was the flight into Egypt. This is the attack of displacement and the threat against the safety of your children. If you feel like the world is becoming a hostile place for your family to grow in faith, you are feeling the edge of the second sword. The third sword was the loss of the child Jesus in Jerusalem, which represents the agony of losing the sense of God's presence or seeing a loved one drift away from the faith. Every one of these sorrows corresponds to a specific hole that the darkness tries to rip in your life right now in this 5th week of Lent. By identifying which sword is currently piercing your heart, you can stop fighting a ghost and start applying a specific spiritual remedy. You are not just suffering at random. You are being targeted in specific areas, and the Mother of Sorrows is the only one who has the map of these wounds. She knows exactly where the enemy is going to strike next because she has already taken the hit for you. When you consecrate your specific pain to a specific sorrow of Mary, you are engaging in a form of spiritual counterintelligence. You are taking the very weapon the devil used to hurt you, and you are handing it over to the woman who uses it to reveal the secret thoughts of the heart. This tactical mapping is what allows you to move from being a victim of your circumstances to being a guardian who anticipates the moves of the adversary. This clarity is essential because as we move closer to the darkness of Good Friday, you will need a silence that is more than just the absence of noise. You need to pay close attention to the date on your calendar, because tomorrow is not just another Saturday in March. It is the 5th Saturday of Lent, and it represents a unique spiritual window that the Church provides just before the high-stakes drama of Palm Sunday begins. Think of this day as the eye of the hurricane, where everything goes eerily still before the final wall of the storm hits your house. Most people will waste tomorrow by filling it with chores and noise and digital distractions, but the Mother of Sorrows is inviting you into a different kind of silence. This is the silence of preparation. She knew the end was coming, and she spent these final hours in a state of profound interior recollection. You need this silence because your soul is currently redlining from the stress of the world and the fatigue of your penances. Think about the words in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verse 26, which says that it is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Tomorrow is your day to wait quietly. It is a day to stop arguing with God and to stop trying to figure out how you're going to survive the next 2 weeks. Instead, you should imitate the silence of Mary, who held all these things in her heart without needing an immediate explanation from heaven. This is not a passive silence of boredom, but an active silence of vigilance. When you turn off the television and put down your phone tomorrow, you are creating a vacuum that the Holy Spirit is eager to fill with the specific strength you will need for Holy Week. You are clearing the debris from the altar of your heart so that the sacrifice of the cross has a clean place to land. If you ignore this window of silence, you will enter the passion of the Lord with a cluttered and anxious mind, and you will miss the subtle whispers of grace that are only audible in the stillness. Mary is the mistress of this silence, and she wants to teach you how to listen to the heartbeat of her Son as it begins to slow down toward the Friday of the cross. This stillness is the only thing that will keep you grounded when the world starts to scream next week. But as you enter this silence, you will find that it acts as a mirror that reflects things about yourself that you might not be ready to see. You need to look into the mirror that Simeon held up in the temple because it is currently reflecting the parts of your character that you have been trying to hide since Ash Wednesday. Remember the words in the Gospel, according to Luke chapter 2, verses 34 to 35, where the old prophet tells Mary that a sword will pierce her soul, so that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. This is a terrifying spiritual diagnostic tool because it means that the sorrows of the mother are the light that exposes the shadows of the children. When you watch her standing at the cross, you are forced to ask yourself why you are actually following this path. Are you doing these Lenten penances because you love the Lord? Or are you doing them because you love the image of yourself as a disciplined and holy person? Most of our religious activity is a thick layer of paint over a very cracked wall. But the edge of the sword of sorrow scrapes that paint away. This 5th week of Lent is where the masks fall off. If you are angry today because your fast is difficult, or if you are resentful toward those who are not sacrificing as much as you are, then the sword has already done its work. It has revealed that your heart is still seeking its own comfort and its own glory. This is not a moment for shame, but a moment for a radical and honest assessment of your soul. Mary is holding this mirror for you not to condemn you, but to save you from the hypocrisy that kills the spiritual life. She wants you to see that your failed resolutions are actually a gift because they reveal your total dependence on the mercy of God. When the thoughts of your heart are revealed in the light of her sorrow, you can finally stop pretending to be a saint and start actually becoming one. This honesty is the only foundation that can support the weight of the coming passion. If you try to enter Holy Week with a fake smile and a hidden agenda, you will miss the entire point of the sacrifice. But when you accept the truth that the mirror reveals, you are ready to enter the next stage of the journey, which is the profound and necessary loneliness of the soul. You have to accept that there is a specific kind of loneliness that is required for the completion of your Lenten mission. We call this the widowhood of the soul. It is that cold and empty feeling you get when the initial excitement of Lent has died and the consolations of the spiritual life seem to have vanished into thin air. You feel like you are praying into a void, and you wonder if God has forgotten your name. This is exactly where the Mother of Sorrows meets you today. Think about the isolation of Mary as she followed her son to Calvary. The crowds that had cheered him were now screaming for his blood, and the friends who had promised to stay were nowhere to be found. She was entering a total spiritual widowhood where the only thing she had left was her faith in the promise of God. This feeling of being alone is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are being stripped of your attachments to everything that is not God. Most of us use our religious communities and our spiritual habits as a way to feel safe, but the Lord wants you to be safe in Him alone. Think about the words in the book of Psalms, chapter 27, verse 10, which tells us that even if my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. In this widowhood of the soul, you are learning the difference between feeling God and knowing God. Mary did not feel the presence of the Father when she saw her Son abandoned on the cross, but she knew that the Father was still there. This is the maturity that Passiontide is trying to build in you right now. You are being asked to walk these final miles without the emotional high of the early days of Lent. This loneliness is the forge where your character is hardened into the likeness of Christ. It is the only way to ensure that your faith is built on the rock of truth rather than the shifting sands of your feelings. But as you embrace this isolation, you will begin to realize that your individual struggle is actually part of a much larger and more powerful movement of grace. You need to realize that the loneliness you are feeling is not a sign of defeat, but the initiation into a divine underground movement. We call this the co-redemptive resistance. This is the moment where you stop being a civilian in the spiritual life and you start becoming a partisan for the kingdom of God. Most people think their small Lenten sacrifices are private matters that only affect their own character, but the truth is much more explosive. When you join your fatigue and your failed expectations to the sorrows of Mary, you are contributing to the spiritual treasury of the entire church. Think about the words in the first letter of Peter, chapter 4, verse 13, which tells us to rejoice insofar as we share in Christ's sufferings, so that we may also rejoice and be glad when His glory is revealed. This sharing is an act of resistance against the prince of this world who wants you to believe that your pain is useless. Every time you choose to remain patient when you are exhausted, or every time you offer up the hunger of your fast for a wandering soul, you are launching a counterattack against the darkness. You are teaching the enemy that he cannot break you because you have integrated your struggle into the victory of the cross. This is why the Mother of Sorrows is the commander of this resistance. She stood at the front lines when the rest of the world surrendered, and she is calling you to do the same in these final 14 days of Lent. Your individual struggle is a vital part of a much larger and more powerful movement of grace that is currently shifting the balance of the spiritual world. You are not just trying to get through the day. You are helping to carry the weight of the world back to the Father. This realization changes everything because it turns your burden into a mission. But even a resistance fighter needs a way to handle the reality of their own failures when the pressure becomes too much to bear. You have likely reached the point in this Lenten season where you have already failed at one of your resolutions. Maybe you skipped a day of prayer or you gave in to a temptation that you promised to avoid, and now you are carrying the heavy weight of spiritual shame. The enemy is using this failure to whisper that your entire Quaresma is now invalid and that you should just stop trying altogether. This is the anatomy of a broken promise, and it is exactly where the Mother of Sorrows does her most beautiful work. I want you to look at the scene of the deposition, where the broken and lifeless body of Jesus is placed into the arms of his mother. He had nothing left to give, and he looked like a total failure to the eyes of the world. Mary did not reject him because he was broken. She held him with even more tenderness. This is how she wants to hold your failed promises today. Think about the words in the book of Psalms, chapter 51, verse 17, which tells us that a broken and contrite heart God will not despise. When you bring your failures to Mary, you are allowing her to take those broken pieces and incorporate them into the sacrifice of her Son. She knows that your weakness is actually the door through which grace enters your life. Stop trying to be the hero of your own Lent and start being the child who admits they cannot walk without their mother's hand. When you hand your spiritual scraps to Mary, she embezzles them with the gold of her own merit before presenting them to Jesus. She turns your defeat into a lesson in humility, which is far more valuable to God than a perfect record of fasting. This shift from pride to humility is what will actually get you through these final 14 days. You are learning that the spiritual life is not about your performance, but about your surrender to the one who is performing the work in you. This release of shame is the only thing that will give you the energy to move from your own internal mess to the protective fortress that has been prepared for you. You need to transition today from looking for an external shield to building an internal fortress, because the storms of the next 2 weeks will be too fierce for any surface-level defense. We are moving into the heart of the fortress of the Mater Dolorosa. Most people spend their lives trying to fix their circumstances so they can feel peaceful. But the Mother of Sorrows teaches us how to be peaceful while the circumstances are at their absolute worst. This is the difference between a tent and a castle. A tent is affected by every shift in the wind, but a castle stands because its foundations are sunk deep into the bedrock. When you unite your heart to the sorrows of Mary, you are moving your residence into that castle. You are no longer living on the outskirts of your emotions, where the enemy can easily pick you off with a single thought of despair. Think about the words in the book of Psalms, chapter 46, verse 1, which tells us that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Mary is the most perfect reflection of that divine refuge. Her heart was a fortress of silence and strength, even as she watched the legal and religious systems of her world conspire to kill her Son. If you can learn to retreat into her heart when you feel the spirit of discouragement rising, you will find that the darkness has no door to enter. You become untouchable because you are no longer fighting for your own comfort, but you are resting in her total surrender. This internal security is what allows you to look at the cross with hope instead of horror. It is the only way to remain standing when everyone else is running for cover. But building this fortress requires a radical decision to starve the distractions that are currently feeding your anxiety. You need to understand that the purple veils in the sanctuary are a direct command for you to perform a radical fast of the eyes starting right now. We live in a world that is obsessed with looking and scrolling and consuming images that do nothing but clutter the hallways of our souls with useless noise. But the Mother of Sorrows is calling you to a holy blindness for these final 14 days. If the Church has hidden the beauty of the crucifix, then you must hide the distractions of the world from your own sight. Think about the words in the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 6, verse 22, which tells us that the eye is the lamp of the body. And if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Most of your spiritual exhaustion comes from the fact that your eyes are exhausted by the flickering lights of 1,000 digital screens that promise connection but deliver only isolation. You cannot meditate on the 7 sorrows while your mind is being hijacked by the latest outrage or the newest trend on a social media feed. This fast of the eyes is about protecting your interior fortress and creating a visual desert where the only thing left to see is the reality of the suffering of the Lord. When you choose to close your laptop or silence your notifications, you are not just saving time, but you are saving your focus for the only thing that truly matters. Mary did not look away from the cross even when it was unbearable to see, because her eyes were fixed on the mission of her Son. By veiling your own sight, you are training your soul to see through the darkness of Passiontide with the eyes of faith rather than the eyes of the flesh. You are starving the anxiety that feeds on constant information, and you are feeding the peace that grows in the silence of an uncluttered mind. This deprivation is the only way to ensure that when the veil is finally lifted on Easter Sunday, you will actually have the vision to see the glory of the resurrection. This is the moment where you stop being a spectator of the world and you become a witness of the Passion. But this fast is not just about what you remove from your life, because as you empty your sight, you are preparing your soul for a supernatural infusion of grace that will replace your exhaustion with a strength that the world cannot understand. You are standing at the absolute limit of your human endurance, and that is exactly where the supernatural transfusion of grace begins. Most people think that the spiritual life is a solo climb, but you need to realize that you are currently hooked up to a divine life support system. When your own willpower is flatlining and your heart feels like a dry well, the Mother of Sorrows is performing a mystical exchange that defies the laws of nature. She is breathing her own courage and her own unfathomable peace directly into your exhausted soul. Think about the words in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 1, verse 14, which describes how the first disciples were constantly devoted to prayer together with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus. In that upper room of fear and exhaustion, she was the steady heartbeat that kept the early church alive until the fire of Pentecost arrived. She is doing the same for you right now. In the darkness of this 5th week of Lent, you do not have to feel the strength for it to be real. You just have to remain in her presence and allow her to be the battery for your spirit. She is the one who stood for 3 hours in the midday sun of Calvary without drinking a drop of water or sitting for a single moment. That same physical and spiritual stamina is being poured into you today. You are not just surviving these final 14 days. You are being infused with the DNA of a martyr. This transfusion is what allows you to smile at your family when you are tired and to stay faithful to your prayer when you are bored. You are operating on borrowed time and borrowed grace, and that is the safest place you could possibly be. Because when you finally reach the end of this journey, you will realize that it was not your feet that carried you to the empty tomb, but the invisible arms of the Mother who refused to let you go. This infusion of power is what prepares you for the ultimate decision that every pilgrim must make before the sun sets on this Passiontide. Finally, you must decide where you're going to stand when the world begins to tremble next week. The journey of these 40 days has led you to this specific point of decision, and the stakes could not be higher. Most of the world will treat the coming days like a theatrical performance or a historical memory, but for you, this must be a permanent shift in the foundation of your life. The Mother of Sorrows is not looking for fans or for people who feel sorry for her. She is looking for companions who will stand at the foot of the cross when the darkness becomes absolute. Think about the words in the book of Revelation, as chapter 21, verse 5, where the one seated on the throne declares that he is making all things new. That process of making things new begins with the total destruction of your old self-reliance. This is the ultimate goal of the Feast of the Sorrows and the entrance into Passiontide. It is the moment where you stop trying to be the hero of your own story and you allow the shadow of the Father and the mantle of the Mother to define your reality. You are no longer a slave to your fatigue or a victim of your discouragement, because you are anchored in an unshakable foundation that has already defeated death itself. When you leave this moment today, I want you to carry this truth with you. The closer you get to the cross, the closer you are to the glory that never fades. Do not look at the ground and do not look at the shadows, but keep your eyes fixed on the one who never moved and never flinched. You are a pilgrim on a path that leads to a victory that is already won. In the comments below, I want you to declare your position by writing the phrase, "Mother, stand with me at the cross." When you do this, you are joining thousands of others who are standing their ground against the spirit of this age. Subscribe to the Pilgrim's Path and turn on the notifications, because the most sacred days of the year are about to begin, and you do not want to walk them alone. The finish line is in sight, and the grace is sufficient. Mother of Sorrows, pray for us.